Welcome to Aurigny On The Airwaves, a podcast series with me, James Filleul, which takes you behind the scenes of Guernsey's airline, Aurigny. Join us as we meet the dedicated people who make the airline soar, giving the Guernsey community a deeper look into the organisation and its operations. So today's podcast is with Max Redhead, who's cabin crew manager for Aurigny. Max, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. We're going to talk a lot about what cabin crew manager means, what's in an everyday role for you and how you got into it. But just tell us a little bit about yourself firstly. How did you get to this point?
So I started with Aurigny when I was at sixth form. So on sort of Saturdays and during the school holidays, I started working on the check-in desks and customer service agent, so doing jobs here and there. And then when I finished sixth form, I then went full-time as a dispatcher, so still working with the ground staff, helping aircrafts get in and out on time. So I did that for about a year. And then from then I started cabin crew. So I've been cabin crew ever since, essentially, but just sort of done different roles within the cabin crew department since then. So I started off as a cabin crew, then went through to senior cabin crew, so all on board the aircraft. Then, must have been about 6 years ago now, I started doing training, so training in the classroom, training on board for new entrant cabin crew and recurrent cabin crew, so we do training every so often. So having crew come into the classroom and going over all our procedures and things like that. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, I started doing more office-based work. So I had a split role of 50% of my time was flying, 50% of my time was in the office doing training and admin stuff like that. And then May this year, I then moved into the cabin crew manager role. So that is mostly office-based now. I still do fly every now and then, but predominantly my time is spent in the office.
Okay, so there's a lot in there to talk about. I mean, the cabin crew, probably the main airline staff that islanders will interact with. But, as a Guernsey guy, what does it mean to you to work for Aurigny, or Guernsey's airline?
I mean, it makes me quite proud to see, especially when you see like the Guernsey flag flying on the tail. I just think it's a really special moment to be flying one of those aircrafts. Proud, I think, is the main thing.
Okay, all right. So let's go back a few years then. So you said there's the training for being a member of Aurigny cabin crew is quite extensive. Just take us through that a little bit. What does it involve?
So it starts with 3 weeks of ground training. So in the classroom, we go through everything that cabin crew need to know to be cabin crew, essentially. So we cover everything from the standard procedures that we'll do day in, day out, what we expected the crew to, sort of their day-to-day activities, right through to first aid and medical scenarios. We look at emergency procedures, so what's expected of them in an emergency, and then we look at some security procedures, and then we look at human performance and how the human body can affect how we're operating, especially if we're thinking of operating at altitude and how the human body can affect that. So we look at, there's a wide variety of things that we do in that classroom-based training, and then from there they do like assessments throughout the course. So we'll do both written assessments and practical assessments as well. So we've got a sort of a mock-up of an aircraft in our training room, and we sort of act out scenarios and that can be anything from emergency situations to like first aid scenarios as well, because we do first aid on board can be very different because you're confined to there's not a lot of space on board the aircraft, so you've got to sort of work around the area that you've got to work with and the equipment that we've got on board. So we'll do lots of practical assessments in that, of acting out different scenarios and what could happen in these different situations. When the crew have then finished all their assessments, all their training, they then gain their wings, and then they go off and do training on board the aircraft. So they'll go on with a trainer who's an extra crew member on that flight, and that trainer will then take them through everything that they've learnt in the classroom and make sure that it makes sense on board the aircraft and then they get signed off sort of after 8 to 10 flights after being with a trainer.
Okay, can you give us some examples then, but of like an everyday scenario that you see on maybe most flights and you have to deal with, and then maybe some of the rarer things that you've seen as well?
It just all sort of rolls into one.
I guess just dealing with people's needs and making sure that, you know, they're fed and watered and you've answered their questions and the normal safety routines are followed.
Yeah, and make sure that everyone knows what we're doing. So obviously that they're listening to the safety demonstration, that they've got their drinks, snacks, duty free, and when things aren't going wrong, making sure that they know what's happening and that they're fully informed in the situation that we're...
So communication skills are a big part of that.
Absolutely a massive part of it, for sure.
And then what about, I mean, some of the rarer things? Obviously, by their nature, they don't happen very often, but what sort of things have you seen that you've had to deal with and you've probably, you know, you've done it well and you've felt proud about that?
Oh, God, that's tricky, putting me on the spot. I think, obviously, the rarer things would be like when we have medical situations that happen on board. Obviously never a nice situation to deal with, but that's why we have such extensive training that crew know how to deal with it and they act upon it. So more so those are the things that come at you when you're least expecting it, really. And
I'm sure you probably see nervous flyers quite often, both people who are just a little bit nervous to people who are really quite scared of flying. How do you deal with those situations?
Again, it comes down to the communication, so making sure that everyone knows what's happening, try and calm them down and talk them through what's happening and when things are happening and why they're happening. Often it's when people don't know what's going on is that they get more nervous because they don't know why the aircraft is turning, why it's making those noises. So if there's anything, it's just to try and explain them through why things are happening, when they're happening, and it calms most people down, but obviously there's some people that... doesn't work, but we just try and speak to them as much as we can and try and take their mind off the situation as well.
Is there any differences you think in what Aurigny tries to bring to its cabin crew service compared to other airlines? Can you see differences there?
I think definitely, because we get to know our passengers a lot more. We see them regularly, so sometimes when we're outside of work, I'll see them if I'm going to the shop or things like that. It's really nice, and people recognise you, and it is nice. Like, since I've moved into this role of less flying, I had someone come on board the other day and said, God, we haven't seen you in a while, and they'd noticed that I hadn't been there. So it is nice to see that passengers recognise and really notice sort of who's on board, and they do get to know the crew, which is really nice.
Do you miss the flying?
Yeah, I do, because it's really nice to... It is also nice because you get to switch your phone off and you're up just with the crew and the passengers. So it is. I do miss the flying, but it's also my new role is a nice new challenge and something a bit different, which is nice.
Okay, so the connection with the passengers, people you get to know the faces over the course of years a lot. And would you say that's what makes working for Aurigny different?
Yeah, absolutely, because you get to know so many different passengers, and you get to. It's funny because you also get to know sort of what they order, what they want, and. I remember there's one specific passenger that's on a specific route that will always order a Diet Coke and a dairy milk, and it just sticks in my mind every time I see him. I'm like, I know exactly what you want as soon as we come down. And it's not just him, but he's just one example of we see these people all the time and get to know what they want, and it is nice to get to know those passengers.
So you said communication skills are a key part of what you do. Is that the most important part of someone who wants to, aspire to be in cabin crew and to do that kind of role?
I think it definitely plays a massive, massive part of it, because you've got to communicate with everyone. So we deal with obviously passengers mostly, but we deal with the pilots as well, other crew members, the ground staff. Everyone that we deal with is all about communication. So everything comes down to the communication in that role. So I think it definitely plays a big part, but obviously there's other elements as well.
Okay, so take us on then into the role you're currently doing, less flying, more management. Mm-hmm. What's a typical day now in that role?
So I think there's two major areas that I look at, and we've got like the compliance side and the safety side. So we've got all our operating manuals and things like that we have to keep up to date because they're regulated by the Civil Aviation Authority. So we need to make sure that they're all up to date, so making sure that they're in line with the regulations. And We do regular audits on flights to make sure that everyone's following those procedures that we've put into place as well. So making sure that all the training stuff is up to date. So we're constantly reviewing all of that. But then there's sort of the people side of it. So making sure that all the crew are happy and everything's running well for them as well, because it's a lot of their life that they spend on board the aircraft. So making sure that they're happy in their role.
Yeah, so the management skills then. So you're moving from a role which is essentially communication and customer care into a role which is much more management and administration. Mm-hmm. How's that transition been?
Yeah, it's been very different, but I think I've definitely taken a lot of skills through from the cabin crew role into the management role, because a lot of stuff, communication obviously a massive part of the management role, but also like problem solving, which cabin crew have to do sort of on the spot. So there's so many skills that I think I've definitely pulled and used from being cabin crew, which has really helped me in the position so far. And
I'm sure that dealing with not disruptive passengers, but passengers who are more difficult to deal with, you learn skills there that which you then translate into management.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. And a lot of that does come down to that clear communication and making sure that people are understanding and know fully what's going on. And I think that, like you said, comes from dealing with more difficult customers and making sure that cabin crew stay happy and know what they're doing. And
so someone listening to this thinking that becoming a member of cabin crew, whether for Aurigny or for any airline, it might be for them, what would you say to them? What do they need to have?
It's tricky because the main thing is being able to speak openly and communicate well with people. Is your main job is dealing with people. We've obviously got the safety side of it as well, and your compliance side and making sure that we're following procedures. And I think that sort of side of it is stuff that we can teach in the classroom. It's the people side that's a lot harder to teach, I would say.
Okay, so that's a good explanation of what people need to have if they're going to go into a cabin crew role. How's the role itself changing? You've done it for a number of years now, so have you seen differences in how it's developed over that time and also how you see it going forward?
I don't think it's changed too much since I've started. I think you often hear a lot of people talking about the old days, but since I've been there, I've been doing it for about 11 years. And I don't think it's changed too much since I've started. So in terms of onboard the aircraft, of what we're doing at the moment, which is exciting, is we're trying to introduce more local stuff on board. So we've been working with the commercial team to look at what local products from Guernsey that we can offer on board the aircraft. So it's not just essentially your holiday in Guernsey is starting when you get on the plane and not when you arrive in Guernsey. And with people coming home, you get that sort of taste of home as soon as you get on board the aircraft, which is nice. So yeah, we've been looking at what things we can offer. Obviously, some things logistically are harder to get on board an aircraft, but we're looking at whatever we can to make it as local as we possibly can.
Okay, all right. So people should keep their eye out for various Guernsey products when they're travelling to and from the island.
Yeah.
Okay. So over the years, you must have met thousands of people on flights and seen thousands of things happen. Anything that particularly stands out? I asked you about some of the difficult things, but anything particularly funny or entertaining which you've seen happen on aircraft over the years?
I think it's flying with all of the crew, because we've got such a close knit group of crew, and yes, it does change. People come, people go, but we have around about 36, 37 cabin crew. So compared to other bigger airlines where they've got 10,000 cabin crew, to have a group of 36, 37 crew, well, everyone's so close and you know everyone. And I think, and you can have some days, and sometimes the hardest days are the more rewarding ones, when we have delays that we're stuck because of the fog and weather and things like that. Sometimes when you've got a really great crew that you're all working together to get through sort of the challenges, those are the most rewarding days, and those are the best days.
So take us back to one of those days, because they obviously living in the Channel Islands, they happen quite often. It's not been an easy couple of years for Aurigny. What would you say to people listening and watching to the podcast who've experienced some of those frustrations? How would you try and convince them that the business is doing what it needs to?
I think we obviously try as much as we can always to get everyone home, because the crew want to get home as well. I think that's the thing with Aurigny, is that all of the crew on board the aircraft also want to be in the same place essentially that the passengers want to be. We all want to be back on the island because we're all based here. All the crew their homes are in Guernsey, so we all want to get back. So I think we all try as hard as we can safely to get home, which is sometimes really challenging because for crew, they'll have, like for a passenger, you'll have one delayed flight on that day, but for the crew member on board, it could be their 4th or 5th flight that they've been delayed by however many hours. So they want to get going just as much as everyone else.
Okay, all right. I mean, finally, what would you say is the best thing about working for Aurigny? What really kind of holds you there as a career and as a business?
I think it is the team that we've got. So everyone knows everyone, which is really nice. And it's not just the crew that know everyone. You know all of the ground staff, you know the pilots, you know people that work in the back office. Is that everyone knows everyone. All of the departments sort of intermingle, and you know the people that you're working with and get to know them really quite well, and often see people outside of work, not just when we're working together. And it's so nice to have that relationship with people. So I think that's the main thing.
What does the future hold for you, do you think?
I've only just started this job, so I've only obviously just started the cabin crew manager role, so just sort of settling into that still. So I think see where that goes.
Okay, Max, thanks very much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Aurigny on the Airwaves with me, James Filleul. Check out the rest of this podcast series to find out more about Guernsey's airline, Aurigny.